this sentence might never come out of my mouth again, so enjoy it. There is a great op-ed in the Seattle Times that you should read. Did you hear that, Nicole? There's a great op-ed in the Seattle Times that you should read. It was written by our friend Caitlin McKenney. She's a research fellow at Discovery Institute, and she focuses on the issue of housing. And as I'll talk with Caitlin about momentarily, I'm just shocked that they allowed her to publish Common Sense on the pages of the editorial pages of the Seattle Times. The headline is "Sensible Law Tenancy Laws Will Help Housing Stability." So, of course, one of the most asinine policies working its way through Olympia right now is rent control. They call it rent stabilization because I guess that just sounds nicer. No, it's rent control. So on top of all the other bad housing policy, all the other policy, the eviction backlog, not being able to, properly check the background of people you're renting a unit to, all of these other policies, they want to institute rent control on top of that. It would be absolutely disastrous for the state of Washington. But Caitlin McKenney, in this op-ed in the Seattle Times, she takes a really unique perspective on this issue. Focusing on this idea of stability. And what does that really mean? Democrats say they want to give these renters stability. But the truth is that everything they have done over the last 5 years especially, has led to more instability for renters. So Caitlin was nice enough to join us today to talk about her piece. Caitlin, welcome back to unDivided.
Thank you for having me, Brandi.
Could it be? Did the Seattle Times publish something that made sense? Did you have to bribe them to publish this or what?
That's a great question. No, but I am honestly a little surprised that they took it and very happy that they did.
Yeah, I mean, me too. And it's a really unique, I think, argument on the rent control front. I mean, there's a ton of arguments against rent control, I think. But this one has to do with sort of the idea that they're pushing this because renters and low-income renters need stability, right? They need some sort of stability. And the argument that you're making here, and you'll explain it much better than I can, is that all of their policies collectively have actually made renting far less stable. So talk about the general thesis of this.
Yeah, exactly. And we refer to it as rent control, but they are referring to it as rent stabilization.
Yes, captured
which,
language.
which I think is very connected to this idea that they're trying to co-opt as their own, which is housing stability and what it means to be stable as a renter in Washington. And most of the arguments that we hear and that we make on the critical side, where we're saying we don't think rent control is a good idea, are focused on the economic aspect, on housing supply and the effect of supply on costs, and on regulations and freedom within the housing market. And all of that is fantastic and true. But I think that in this article, I was trying to latch on to something that maybe comes across better on the progressive left, which is the more human side of things and this idea of stability. And it's exactly what you just said, which is I've spent the last year listening to housing providers and affordable housing providers specifically in Seattle and the greater Seattle region share how difficult it is to provide, to operate, to develop affordable housing here because of the policies that have been put in place and to the detriment of all of the other tenants and renters in those properties.
Yeah, and and I think this is one of the things that stunned me that the Seattle Times took this because it's sort of this ugly truth that a lot of people don't want to talk about when it comes to what's happening in some of these government subsidized, even low-income housing units that really does fit the bill for instability. I mean, what can make you feel more unstable in your home than not feeling safe in your home? Can you talk about some of the policies and just some of the examples you give of, the connection there between the progressive policies and how they've made life really unsafe for some of the renters that they now say that they want to help?
Yeah, well, in the summer last year, the city of Seattle distributed $14 million in one-time emergency funding to stabilize, talk about stability, to stabilize 24 housing providers And so I did a public records request, and you can read their narratives and why they're asking for funding. And it's shocking. And many of them are on the brink of financial collapse. Many of them are facing $1 million or more in unpaid rent because they cannot get tenants who are not paying out of their properties. In the Seattle Times article, I described some of the things that they describe. I mean, it's people with weapons, it's rapes, it's setting the property on fire, it's operating a meth lab, um, threatening people at their door, setting up a house, their own house on the rooftop, and they have to change the locks to get them out of the maintenance shed, threatening maintenance people with weapons. I mean, the list goes on, and it's a very small group of people that are doing these things, but it costs the good tenants who are just trying to pay rent. And so some of the policies in Seattle that we've put in place, there are a few that restrict who landlord's ability to know who's living in their property. And then there's a handful that restrict their ability to get people out of the property who are a danger to everyone else living there.
Yeah, I mean, some of these stories are horrible, and there's been a lot of murders too. We've talked about those. You talk about one of them, the murder of Steve Eden, stabbed more than 20 times in his unit. And so, this idea that we need to give these tenants, especially low-income tenants, stability by capping rent increases, while kind of turning a blind eye to how some of their other policies pushed in the interest of protecting tenants have put put them in these conditions of squalor and danger. I mean, do you think that this is, because you said, you wanted to sort of appeal more to that sort of empathetic, I'd call it like toxic empathy, progressive side of things. Do you think that this will get across to them what they have turned these environments into?
I hope so. I hope it won't be ignored. And that's kind of my point is that how can you say that you're for housing stability and turn a blind eye to the chaos and suffering that's happening in your affordable housing properties? And so, if you want to talk about the cost of rent, you have to be talking about the cost to operate housing and affordable housing in this state. And it's so high because of these policies that you've enacted.
Yeah.
So I hope that that message gets across, and I hope to have done it in a way that really humanizes, these are our neighbors who are suffering because of a few bad actors that we can't get out.
Yeah, and from, just you you did something really genius, which is sort of look at some of the reviews of these properties and just what people are writing. Like there's this one that says if you're going to live there, make sure that you carry a weapon and watch your back. There's another review for an apartment community that says I'm a 19-year-old girl living on her own. This place is not safe. There's the neighbors yelling and threatening murder and to slit someone's throat. Like if lawmakers don't care about that environment, then I don't know if there's any hope for Washington. Can I just ask you, Caitlin, you, Discovery Institute, and all the folks up there, you've covered the housing and homelessness issue quite a bit and what's happening with the housing crisis in our state. What do you think will happen if we pass rent control statewide?
I think that our housing crisis will get worse, meaning I think it will be less affordable. There may be some short-term benefits, but in the long run, I think, and this is where the economic side and the supply side comes in, it will be devastating for our ability to attract more housing development here. If it's not profitable, if it's high risk, low reward, why do we think that will be able to produce enough housing to bring costs down and make it more affordable for everyone here?
It's just common sense. It's so hard for me to, the arguments are so common sense against it. So I'm really hoping that they see the light. The op-ed is Sensible Law, Tenancy Laws Will Help Housing Stability. Caitlin McKenney, we appreciate it so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandi.
We love Caitlin. She's so smart. Again, Caitlin McKenney with Discovery Institute. Read her op-ed in the Seattle Times and only read that op-ed in the Seattle Times and then shut your browser. Does that mean? No. I appreciate the Seattle Times publishing it. And it's just such an interesting point an argument. It's very unique. I mean, there's a million arguments against rent control. It's one of the chief things we're trying to defeat this session because of how bad the implications would be. But this farce that they want housing stability for renters, when they have caused this severe instability for renters. I mean, instability economically because you're going to have people who divest and the units aren't going to be available. I mean, the worst instability you can face as a renter is not that your rent goes up, it's that your unit is sold out from underneath you and it's no longer available for you and you have to find another place to live. And we're going to see that happening. But also, there's endless stories and examples of the crime-ridden, low-income, rent-stabilized units that are funded with taxpayer funds. Like, how is that stabilization for tenants? It's really insane stuff. So an excellent piece. And we do these weekly segments on housing thanks to our friends at RHA, the Rental Housing Association of Washington. We are basically teaming up with them to try to defeat rent control. That is the goal of this session. RHA has the back of landlords, small to mid-sized landlords. It's really important not to fight this fight alone. Become a member of RHA today if you are a landlord. It's like $260 a year. They're going to be in Olympia fighting for you as they are right now, but they can also help you as an individual landlord navigate some of these difficult situations that you might find yourself in because of some of these misguided policies. So we thank rhawa.org for sponsoring these weekly segments for us so we can bring these important issues to light.